couple of days ago, Timothée Chalamet managed to turn the entire internet against him with one single sentence.
And I don't want to be working in ballet or opera or, things where it's like, hey, keep this thing alive, even though no one cares about this anymore.
Which is an incredible statement to make whilst promoting a movie about ping pong. And naturally, the internet responded in the calm, rational way it always does, by completely losing its mind. Suddenly, ballet companies across the world were making TikToks defending their art, opera singers were posting dramatic response videos, and people online were acting like Timothée had personally kicked over Tchaikovsky's grave. But the more I watched this situation unfold, the more I realized something. This extreme reaction wasn't ever really just about ballet or opera, because there is some truth to what he said. Some truth. But we'll dive into that later. The point is, I think what people are really angry about is Timothée himself, because recently he has transformed into someone unrecognizable. Since he gained popularity back in 2019, he's always been known as the internet's boyfriend. Not only did he come across kind and intelligent, but he was also an incredible actor. Men wanted to be him, women wanted to be with him, and for years not a single person had a bad word to say about him, which is so rare in an industry that is overflowing with egos. But that was all until recently, where it seems like he's gotten a personality transplant. He's been saying the most outrageous cocky things in interviews, acting like he literally invented cinema. There's rumors that he's a nightmare to work with and that his team doesn't even let you look him in the eyes. And that is just the surface of the stuff we're going to touch on in this video. Basically, in such a short amount of time, he turned into one of the most unlikable people on the internet, and no one could really work out what happened. How did he go from the internet's boyfriend to the internet's toxic ex in the space of a year? Some people are blaming his relationship with Kylie Jenner, some people think it's just the real him finally showing, but I think the answer is a little bit more complicated. Because here's the thing, what's happening with Timothée isn't actually that unusual. In fact, if you've been paying attention to Hollywood long enough, it's almost predictable. And the deeper you dig into this story, the weirder it gets. Doing research for these videos means I spend a lot of time clicking through random websites, and honestly, it is shocking just how often I end up on a site that is questionable to say the least. Which is exactly why I started using NordVPN. Obviously, the classic reason that people use a VPN is for privacy. It protects your connection so what you're doing online stays private. But what I didn't realize is how many extra security features it has built in. For example, NordVPN has something called Threat Protection Pro, which basically scans websites before you enter them and warns you if something looks like a scam. So if you accidentally click on a dodgy link, it can actually block the site before it even loads. It also blocks malware downloads and even monitors the dark web for your credentials. So if your email or password show up in a data leak, it alerts you straight away, which is honestly so reassuring when you spend as much time online as I do. Another thing I like is that one account protects up to 10 devices, so you can have it on your phone, your laptop, your tablet, basically everything. So if you want to try NordVPN for yourself, you can get a huge discount with the purchase of a 2-year plan, plus 4 extra months free at nordvpn.com/McBain. It's completely risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it out and see if you like it. Again, that's nordvpn.com/McBain. Thank you NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. So a couple of days ago, Timothée Chalamet sat down with Matthew McConaughey to talk about all things Hollywood, and obviously, as we know, this didn't end very well. But before we get into the main controversy, there was actually another moment in this conversation that really caught my attention because it perfectly ties into the point of this video. The two of them get talking about how they first met on the set of Interstellar in 2014, which leads Timothée to tell this insane little story. Apparently, on his last day of filming, he went into his trailer, walked into the bathroom, and found a massive unflushed poo sitting in the toilet. Yes, you heard that right. So naturally, he started to ask around the set, trying to figure out who on earth would do such a thing, only to discover that the culprit was Matthew McConaughey himself. When Timothée asked him why he would do something like that, Matthew simply said, "In Texas, it's a coming of age, baby." Is biological warfare normal or something in Texas? Like, can someone please confirm that for me? And I know this can seem like such a funny, harmless prank on the outside, but when you stop to actually think about it, it kind of gets concerning. It's weird enough that this is a 56-year-old man doing this to a 17-year-old, but it's just the power imbalance of it all. Timothée even said in this interview that he was so genuinely offended by it at the time, but he was 17 on one of his first big movie sets, and this is Matthew McConaughey. If he makes a big deal out of it, he's the one that's gonna end up looking difficult. And that is Hollywood in a nutshell. An industry where people become so powerful they can treat others however they want with zero consequences. And the crazy part is that 17-year-old kid on the set of Interstellar eventually became one of those people. Because over the last few years, Timothée Chalamet hasn't just become famous, he's become one of the biggest actors in the world. And can you guess what happens when someone reaches that level? They get a big old inflated ego. Suddenly, they're not just people who play they pretend for a living anymore. They're cultural commentators, philosophers, the saviors of cinema. And during that exact same interview, Timothée ends up proving my point.
And I don't want to be working in ballet or opera and keep this thing alive, even though no one cares about this anymore. All respect to the ballet and opera people out there. I just lost 14 cents in viewership.
Firstly, can we again just talk about the fact that he is saying no one cares about ballet or opera whilst promoting a movie about ping pong? Just sit with that for a second. As you can probably guess, him saying that no one cares about these art forms didn't really sit well with a lot of people, and they reacted with violence. No, they didn't start hitting him with their point shoes, but they would have if they could. Nearly every ballet company in the world started posting TikToks defending the art and proving that people in fact do care. Even people outside of these communities have been going absolutely crazy on him, basically acting like he said he loves kicking puppies. If I'm being honest here, I do think people are overreacting, and before you type your little hate comments, please just hear me out. Firstly, I should say that I'm speaking as someone who spent a good chunk of my life as a full-time ballerina. We're talking in the studio every single day from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. up until the age of 16. It was literally my entire life. So trust me, I have the credentials. What Timothée said wasn't exactly wrong, he just worded it really bad. Him saying that no one cares about this anymore is such a lazy way to describe what is actually a really complex topic. And then to follow it up by laughing about losing 14 cents in viewership from the ballet and opera community, it's taking the piss. Because at that point, you're not just making an observation, you are mocking people who are already watching that art form struggle. However, what a lot of people are missing is the bit before he actually says this, which provides so much more context.
Are we losing attention? A Netflix sort of production, they want their biggest action set pieces up front. The logic used to be you save your big action set piece for the end of a movie and you save the fireworks for the end, but now they want something up front.
What he was trying to say is that he doesn't want cinema to lose its place in mainstream culture the way that opera and ballet have. Those art forms used to be hugely popular with the general public, but over time they became something only a smaller audience regularly engages with. And in a world where people's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, he doesn't want movies to drift into that same category. And honestly, that is kind of a valid point. Harsh, but valid. Yes, ballet performances do sell out, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's popular. Ticket prices have become so expensive that ballet and opera are increasingly only accessible to a very specific, very wealthy demographic. It's not that the art form is dead, it's that the general public don't engage with it the same way that they used to, and it is true. I don't know a single person outside of the ballet world that goes to watch and support ballet or opera. And what so many people are refusing to acknowledge is that if you look at the reality of the ballet industry, it becomes so much more obvious why people don't engage with it anymore. Companies are shutting down, the industry itself is incredibly backwards and harmful, and the top paid ballerinas hardly make enough money to get by. Not to mention that this is a career that stops in your mid-30s with zero safety net, so it's no wonder that this is becoming less popular, especially in today's economy. People also keep bringing up the fact that all of the women in his family did ballet and how he somehow disrespected them by saying this, but again, I disagree. I think that the fact he grew up around this industry means he knows a lot more than majority of the people raging about it online. Just listen to this clip.
Again, it sounds pretentious, but like Baryshnikov and Balanchine and the way these dancers move, these classic ballet guys, I loved.
I was shocked when I saw this because the ballet dancers he named are so incredibly niche, meaning he has to have knowledge and at least somewhat care about the industry to know that. And I'm gonna be honest, this clip definitely changed my opinion on his comment. It made me realize how performative a lot of this outrage is online, because I can guarantee you if you were to ask any of these people to name one ballet dancer or one opera singer, they wouldn't be able to. Again, I'm not outright defending Timothée here because I do think how he said it was wrong. When you are one of the most famous actors in the world, casually dismissing entire art forms like that is obviously gonna come across badly. Ballet and opera aren't just random niche hobbies, people dedicate their entire lives to them. If his point was that he doesn't want cinema to become something only a tiny audience engages with, then he should have just said that. But reducing it to no one cares about this anymore is not only incorrect, but also genuinely insensitive, so it's no wonder why people reacted the way they did. That being said, the scale of the outrage online has genuinely been hilarious to me. People are really out here acting like Timothée did some unforgivable crime. Meanwhile, alleged woman beater Sean Penn is also nominated for an Oscar this year, but I don't hear anyone talking about that. And while we're on the subject of people nominated for an Oscar this year, Guillermo del Toro once signed a petition to have Roman Polanski released from prison. You know, the director Roman Polanski who was convicted of sleeping with a 13-year-old when he was 43? And when Guillermo was asked in 2018 if he regretted signing signing the petition, he declined to answer. Still your favorite director though, right? So yes, the outrage around Timothee's comment does look a little bit performative when you look at the bigger picture. Also, I've seen everyone saying that Timothée just lost out on his Oscar because of this comment, which is just so ridiculous. May I remind you that Roman Polanski won his Oscar after he was convicted. The reason why he wasn't there to accept his award was because he fled America to avoid sentencing, and if he comes back, he will be put in jail for probably ever. But don't worry, because he still got a standing ovation from all of his peers. Okay, I got a little bit carried away there, so let's just reel it back in, because I'm not here to point out every bad person in Hollywood. I already did a whole video on that. What I am here to talk about today is ego, because believe it or not, Timothée has been saying the exact same thing about ballet and opera for years, but no one had an issue with it until now.
You start working on movies, you start acting, like pursuing your thing, and like I started to get the sense maybe it was like opera or ballet or something. It's kind of like a dying art form or something.
So the problem people have isn't actually with what he said, it's about him as a person. He's made himself so unlikable recently that people have been literally preying on his downfall. That's why his comment escalated to the extreme it did. I was there when Timothée started gaining popularity back in 2019, and when I tell you he was such a different person back then. He had his first big break after starring in the movie Call Me By Your Name, which earned him an Oscar nomination at just 22 years old. Not only was he extremely talented, but he was also incredibly likable. He was sweet, kind, and almost seemed embarrassed of his own hype.
I feel so bad for all of you guys. No, you're waiting in line outside, you saw Jessica Chastain, and now you're like, who the hell is this guy?
No. Honestly, everyone's gonna know you, buddy. Yeah, if they don't already.
But this humble attitude just made him all the more likable. From there, he basically turned into the poster child of indie films, starring in things like Lady Bird, Beautiful Boy, and Little Women. But even as his popularity grew, he kept the same slightly awkward, intensely passionate persona that felt so genuinely authentic. Flash forward to now, and you wouldn't even believe he's the same person. But before we get into the good stuff, I actually want to try and pinpoint where this change happened, because I have a conspiracy theory. So in 2024, he starred in the movie A Complete Unknown, which had him nominated for an Oscar. But something was different about this nomination compared to the one in 2019. You could tell he desperately wanted to win. Now you're probably thinking, well, everyone wants to win and Timothée isn't any different. Yes, he is. I believe that he went into this movie with the intention of winning an Oscar, and I believe this for a number of reasons. First of all, the type of role he chose. Because if you've been following the Oscars for long enough, you will know that there is one genre the Academy absolutely loves. Biopics. And they don't just like them a little bit, no, they are obsessed. Since the year 2000, at least 33 actors have won an Oscar for playing a real person, which is the highest rate in Academy's history. If you want to maximize your chances of winning, playing a historical figure is basically the safest bet in Hollywood. Then you have the promotion of the movie, because I don't think I've ever seen Timothée promote a movie so aggressively before. Well, that was until Marty Supreme, but we will get to that in a minute. Normally, Timothée has this very laid back, very mysterious type of public image, but for this movie's promotion, he was everywhere. Interviews, panels, screenings, Q&As, it felt like an awards campaign from the very beginning. Then you have the preparation for the role itself. Timothée said that he spent over 5 years becoming the character of Bob Dylan. 5 years! Oh my gosh, I just realized that that would mean him and Austin Butler were living as their characters at the same time. That would have been an exhausting few years for everyone else in Hollywood. Now obviously, actors preparing intensely for roles isn't new, but when you combine the biopic, the aggressive promotion, the years of preparation, and the full-on awards campaign, it starts to feel a little less like someone just happened to get nominated and a lot more like someone who was very intentionally trying to win. And Timothée's speech at the SAG Awards that year proves exactly that.
I'm really in pursuit of greatness. I know people don't usually talk like that, but I want to be one of the greats. I'm inspired by the greats. I'm inspired by the greats here tonight. I'm as inspired by Daniel Day-Lewis, Marlon Brando, and Viola Davis as I am by Michael Jordan and Michael Phelps, and I want to be up there.
A lot of people online were completely outraged by the speech, calling him arrogant and entitled, but I have to say, I'm kind of on the fence with this one, again, because on the one hand, I think him talking about his ambitions was quite vulnerable and honest, because most actors would never say something like that out loud. They'll pretend they're just happy to be there and they don't care about the awards, when in reality, every single person in that room wants to win. But on the other hand, the moment he said that he wanted to be one of the greats, it started to feel a little bit different. Because now, he's not just talking about work, he's talking about legacy, which is where I think people start to get uncomfortable. Because Because he said he wants to be like Daniel Day-Lewis, Marlon Brando, and Viola Davis, but these are people who spent their entire careers building that reputation. And they didn't do it with the intention of being the very best. That title just came naturally with their talent. So when someone at the very beginning of their career starts talking about wanting to be in that category rather than just wanting to create good movies, it does start to feel a little bit selfish. So the Oscars eventually come around and Timothée ends up losing Best Actor to Adrien Brody, who is another actor with an incredibly large ego. Adrien then went on to do an obnoxious nearly 6-minute speech which broke the record for the longest Oscar speech in history. Again, it's just another classic case of Hollywood ego. Why on earth do they think what they're saying is so important? For some reason, it is so common for actors when they reach a certain point to suddenly think they are the second coming of Christ. No, seriously, Chris Pratt once compared himself to Jesus. I'm not joking. And you can imagine after all that build-up, Timothée just sitting there through that 6-minute speech, seething with anger. And then to top it all off, Mikey Madison, who is a fresh actress on the scene, goes and wins Best Actress at just 25 years old. I genuinely think that Timothée's brain chemistry was altered that night because from there on, he was never the same person. So 2025 comes along and this time he is determined to win. He's starring in the movie Marty Supreme, where he plays the role of a legendary ping pong player. Again with the biopic bait film. And just like a complete unknown, he spent 7 to 8 years preparing for this movie, which I don't even know how that's possible. The press tour for this movie is where things really get out of control. If you had an internet connection during this time, you literally couldn't escape the color orange. He was flying blimps, he featured on a rap song, he became the first person to stand on top of the Las Vegas Sphere, which was made to look like a ping pong ball. He even started selling Marty Supreme jackets, which people went absolutely nuts for. And just listen to how he promoted these jackets, okay? So he handed them out to a bunch of celebrities who, in his opinion, were the greatest in their fields. Which is so interesting because not only does he want to be one of the greats, but now he's deciding who else makes the cut too. The power this man gives himself. He gave one to Tom Brady, Justin Bieber, Bill Nye, and even Misty Copeland. Giving it to a ballerina and then saying no one cares about ballet is crazy work. And look, there is no denying that this press was creative and it clearly worked. It became A24's highest grossing film ever, making over $162 million worldwide. But then came the interviews where he basically insinuated that he was going to get an Oscar for his performance.
This is a real conversation. I'm trying to keep my I'm trying to keep my PR brain on. But the real truth is, with Marty Supreme, I feel confident to the degree that by next summer, I don't know, man. Should I not be saying this? Like, I feel like it'll. You know. Well, no.
Obviously, he doesn't outright say that he's gonna get an Oscar, but what else is he trying to say? Keep in mind, the Oscar nominations weren't even out yet, and he was already talking about it like it was a done deal. The point is, he didn't know who else was gonna be nominated. He just assumed that he would win. That is not confidence in your work, that is just ego. Yes, there is no denying the fact that he is a good actor, but the problem is that he thinks he's better than everyone else, and he's not. I thought Marty Supreme was a pretty good movie, and the only thing that really bothered me about it was some of Timothée's performance. Now I know some of you are gonna say I'm just being biased because of my opinions on him, but I promise you that is not the case. I watched the movie before I saw his comments, and even if I saw his comments before I watched the movie, I literally would not care. I just don't think he's a character actor in the slightest. All I saw in that movie was Timothée Chalamet. It didn't help that for some reason he was the only one without a New York accent. Like, I'm not joking, his whole family in the movie, everyone around him, all had this thick New York accent apart from him, who just sounded like Timothée. I was so baffled by this. I had to look it up after the movie to see if anyone else was talking about this because I felt like I was going crazy.
Marty Mouther, Timothée Chalamet's character, is loosely based on the real-life Marty Reisman, an Ashkenazi Jewish New Yorker born in the early 20th century. The thing super noticeable about Reisman's accent is L vocalization. It's when the L sound in the coda of a word final syllable, basically the L sound after the last vowel of a word, is pronounced like a W or a vowel sound. We can hear it in Reisman's speech and how he says ball, like ball, in this clip.
Average player will learn how to smash the ball, defend against smash shots, and...
But Chalamet doesn't do this. Listen to how he says physical without L vocalization in this clip.
You want to get physical? Like an ape?
I also think that some of his co-stars completely outacted him, especially Odessa, whose performance was so good and so authentic. Again, that is not to say that Timothée Chalamet is a bad actor, because he's not. He's a good actor. He is just not who he thinks he is. The greatest actor in my mind is someone like Philip Seymour Hoffman, who could literally morph into different people. He wasn't in this business to be the best and have his name in flashing lights. He did it because he loved acting, and it showed. But hold on, because Timothée wasn't done there.
Like, this is probably my best performance, you know? And that it's been like 7-8 years that I feel like I've been handing in really, really committed, top-of-the-line performances. And it's important to say it out loud because the discipline and the work ethic I'm bringing to these things, I don't want people to take for granted. I don't want to take for granted. This is really some top-level shit.
I'm sorry, what? This is one of the most out-of-touch things I've ever heard. You were literally just promoting a movie. That is it. And somehow it's turned into a speech about how we should be appreciating you. I don't want people to take it for granted, like he's some untouchable legend that we should all be grateful exists. That is not how a normal, grounded person talks about their work. That is someone who has gotten so deep into their own head about winning an award that they've completely lost the plot. Also, the fact that he's been acting like it's some insane thing that he's been putting good movies out for 8 years with no Oscar win is crazy. It took Leonardo DiCaprio basically his whole career for him to finally win an Oscar, and his catalog is miles better. And I'm not saying that Timothée is a bad person or that you shouldn't be ambitious, but it's just the way that he acts like he's entitled to one, which makes it so off-putting. I saw someone say recently that Timothée treats acting like as if it's a sport, and I think that is the most perfect explanation for it. No one blinks an eye when athletes say they want to be the best, but that's because sport is competitive. There are rankings, there are stats, there is a scoreboard, it makes sense. But acting is an art, not a sport. There is no scoreboard, there is no finish line. You cannot objectively measure one performance against another and declare a winner. So when you start talking about yourself like you're Ronaldo chasing a Ballon d'Or, it doesn't translate. It just comes across as someone who has fundamentally misunderstood what art is supposed to be about. The main defense I've seen for this interview was people saying that, oh, he's just in the character of Marty Supreme. I cannot stand that excuse. I can't. Because that is the get out of jail free card that Hollywood has been handing to actors for decades. Every time an actor acts insufferable, the explanation is always the same. Oh, don't worry, they're just method acting. But the funny thing about method acting is that Hollywood has completely twisted it from what it was supposed to be, because the original idea was actually really simple. Instead of using your own real memories and your trauma to make yourself cry, you just use your imagination instead. So for example, if your character has just lost a parent, you don't need to sit there thinking about your own dead relatives until you start crying. You imagine what the situation would feel like for the character. Because real method acting, it's internal. It's all about psychology and emotion, not about tormenting your castmates because you think that's what the Joker would do. But before I explain why I think method acting has completely changed, let's look at some examples of what it's like today so we can get the full picture of what we're dealing with. Let's start off with Jared Leto because we basically have to. For his role as the Joker in Suicide Squad, Jared decided to stay in character for the entire shoot. And I'm talking offset as well. This started with him sending his castmates some very strange gifts. He sent Margot Robbie a rat, Will Smith got a box of bullets, and his other castmates a bag of used protection and a few questionable toys, which is just disgusting. There was also a time when he got one of his henchmen to show up in the middle of rehearsal and dump a pig carcass on the table, just straight in front of Oscar winner Viola Davis, who later said it was absolutely horrific. I'm sorry, but how is this allowed? I would literally call the police and he would get arrested, no? But in Hollywood, it's called immersing yourself in the role. And do you want to know what the funniest part of this is? Jared's screen time in Suicide Squad ended up only being around 10 minutes and the movie bombed so hard critically. So what was even the point? And then we have actor Shia LaBeouf, whose commitment to roles can be absolutely terrifying. Now, unlike Jared Leto, Shia's style of method acting has to do more with self-punishment rather than pranking others. For the World War II movie Fury, Shia was playing the role of a soldier, and to help him get into character, he decided that showers were optional. As in, he opted not to take a single shower for the entire 4-month shoot. 4 months, no bathing, just let that sink in. Apparently it was so bad that his castmates had to move hotels. And you won't believe me when I say this, but Shia is not the only one who goes to this extreme. Whilst filming Castaway, Tom Hanks ended up with a staph infection because he refused to shower, which shut down production for 3 weeks. Daniel Day-Lewis, one of the greatest actors of all time, also did the 4-month no shower trend whilst filming The Crucible. I'm gonna put myself into the shoes of a crew member, okay? Sure, I'll call you by your character's name, whatever, but the second there are literal flies buzzing around you because you smell like a decomposing raccoon, yeah, I'm out. I'm not suffering for your art. I could go on and on about these insane stories, but the point is, this is what I mean when I'm talking about Hollywood ego. The belief that your commitment to a role gives you the right to make everyone else around you miserable. I think Robert Pattinson says it best.
I always say about people who do method acting, you only ever see people doing the method when they're playing an asshole.
That's funny.
They literally do.
You're funny. You're a funny person.
You never see someone just being lovely to everyone, going, I'm really deep in character.
Yeah, right. Oh my God, that's so funny.
He is literally so right. You never see anyone method acting as a kind or generous person. But again, this was never what method acting intended to be, so how did we get here? If you were to ask me, I would put it down to the fact that acting is such an ego-driven industry. Everyone wants to be seen as the most committed, the most serious actor in the room, the most award-worthy. And when everyone is competing for that title, they start to one-up each other. Oh, you stayed in character for a week? I stayed in character for 4 months. Oh, you lost 10 pounds for a role? I lost 30. It becomes less about the performance and more about the story you get to rub in people's face after. I think that the Academy also plays a huge role in this shift. Because if you look at Oscar history, the performances that win are almost always the ones with the most dramatic transformations. The Academy has essentially trained actors to believe that the more you visibly suffer for a role, the more worthy you are for an Oscar. But the thing is, plenty of legendary actors have used method acting in the way it was intended through empathy and research, and it turns out great. Meryl Streep, who's arguably the greatest actress alive, prepared for Sophie's Choice by researching Holocaust history, interviewing survivors, and learning a Polish accent. That's it. There's no theatrics, no making anyone's life difficult, just simply doing research into someone else's experience. Also, there's a reason why you don't hear any of these crazy method acting stories about women, and it's simply because they wouldn't be able to get away with it. Can you imagine if an actress made crew members carry her around set and spoon feed her lunch because she's playing someone with mobility issues? No, because she would be labeled difficult within 5 minutes and probably never work again. And I know what I said sounds like a crazy example, but guess what? Both Jared Leto and Daniel Day-Lewis did this for months on end and no one batted an eye. The same behavior that gets a man called deeply committed and one of the greats would end a woman's career overnight, which tells you that it was never really about the art to begin with. And that brings me to something I find really interesting. Timothée Chalamet never started off as a method actor, but he is now, which I don't think is a coincidence. When you're a young unknown actor trying to break through, you don't have the power to pull that kind of thing. You just show up, do the work, and be grateful that you're in the room. You're not sending dead animals to castmates or refusing to shower for months. You simply cannot afford to be that person yet. But the moment you become the most talked about actor in Hollywood, suddenly nobody is going to tell you no, and that's exactly when we started seeing a different side of Timothée. There has also been so many rumors about what he's like on set when he's doing this method, and they're not great. Things like his team allegedly telling crew members not to make eye contact with him blowing his vape in people's faces, and apparently he even refused to use the communal bathroom and instead did his business in bottles, which is just disgusting. Obviously, these are just rumors and anyone can make up anything, but there was one true story that came out recently which makes these rumors easier to believe. A comedian named Tom Davis shared a story about his time working on the set of Wonka. He said that whilst the rest of the crew were given a pretty rubbish breakfast every morning, Timothée had his own private chef who would cook him 3 separate meals every single morning. And then he'd pick the one he wanted and the other 2 would end up in the bin. Obviously, this didn't go down well with people online, and they were saying how disrespectful it was to waste food like that. But honestly, I think people are just being dramatic. Can't you see that this was just him method acting as Wonka? Of course he needs 3 breakfast options, because if you were to ask him what he actually wanted, he would just say chocolate. No, but seriously, this type of behavior is not only wasteful and disrespectful, but it just shows how far removed he is from everyone else on set. When you're throwing away 2 full meals every morning whilst the crew are eating a basic buffet, it's pretty clear you're operating on a completely different level. And by the way, this is not normal for the majority of actors. Usually the actors would eat the same meals as the crew do. It's only the super high A-listers who get the rules bent for them. It reminds me of how Robert Downey Jr. gets to have his own huge personal area on set called Downeyland. weekend. It's basically just all these trailers cornered off just for him, and if you're lucky enough, he might invite you inside for lunch. How nice is he? Oh, and how could I forget about how he renegotiated his $80 million contract for the new Avengers movie to include a private jet to and from set. I wish I was joking. Why do you need a private jet on top of $80 million? It just makes me think about the crew members on the set who are literally getting paid $200 a day? This is Hollywood ego. When you have so much power, you can do whatever you want. And this ego leaks into the movies themselves. Did you know that Vin Diesel, The Rock, and Jason Statham have clauses in their contract which say their characters can't lose fights? I am so serious. Vin Diesel even brought his sister onto set to literally count the number of punches his character received to ensure the ratio was fair. I mean, talk about having a fragile ego. And the funniest bit about this is that there is a time in Fast and Furious where Vin Diesel and The Rock have to fight each other. Now tell me what happens when two actors who aren't allowed to lose fights fight each other. Apparently the solution is rewriting the scene so it looks like no one lost. There was a fight scene which originally had The Rock lying on the ground in front of Vin Diesel, and they had to change it so that he was sitting instead, because apparently lying down felt too much like losing. And I want you to just think about the ego that requires. Not just putting a no losing clause in your contract, but needing the entire production to constantly monitor how tough you look on screen. But they get away with it because they can. The person Timothée is becoming is no different to the rest of the top people in Hollywood. It's just that he says these things out loud. And I've seen a lot of people blaming his new behavior on the fact he's dating Kylie Jenner, which I absolutely hate. This man is 30 years old. He's not being corrupted by his girlfriend. The idea that a woman is responsible for a grown man's ego is just exhausting. And the fact that people are so quick to point the finger at her just because of who her family is and what she represents to people says a lot more about how we treat women than it does about Timothée's behavior. It's even more upsetting that it's mainly women who are blaming her. It just honestly says everything about how deep this internalized misogyny runs. We'll defend a man's ego before we'll defend each other. At the end of the day, I don't think Timothée Chalamet randomly woke up one day and decided to be this person. I think it happened slowly, the way it always does. Because when you're surrounded by people who treat you like you're the most important person in every room, who never say no and never give you a single reason to question yourself, eventually that becomes your normal. The other day, I watched Brittany Broski's interview with Harry Styles, and I couldn't stop noticing how every time Harry made the most average throwaway joke, the entire room died with laughter. And if that's what's happening around him 24/7, I bet Harry Styles feels like the funniest man alive. That is the environment that these people live in every single day, and I genuinely do believe that it starts to warp your mind. Not because they're necessarily bad people, but because nobody around them is being honest with them. The industry allows it, the fans allow it, the studios allow it, and then we all sit here shocked when they come out and say something incredibly cocky. Timothée's ego didn't come out of nowhere. It was built, and I think that is the most uncomfortable part of this whole conversation. I'm so curious to see what the internet's reaction would be like if Timothée wins the Oscar. I think by the time this video comes out, the Oscars is the next day, so let's see how it goes. Let me know what your opinion is on Timothée's behavior in the comments. If you think I'm being dramatic, if you agree with me, please let me know. If you made it this far and if you're passionate about cinema, please comment the word Oscar so I can see who the real ones are and I can like all your comments. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!